Hi, Andrew Culkin here again, author of Amanda, A Cautionary Tale. Again, it's the life story of the last 20 years of my wife's addiction with alcoholism and ultimately her untimely death a little over 2.5 years ago. Today, I want to talk about 5 ways alcoholics directly affect their family. Okay, and this comes about when a key member of a family is an alcoholic. Now, this will affect every member of the family. Now, what I mean by key member, I'm talking about either the mother, the father, the head of household, either way, or certainly an authority in the family that will directly affect the family more so than a child will in some ways. And that's a different story entirely. Now, the adage that if someone is an alcoholic, their entire family will suffer in much the same way as the addicted. And this is very true. Alcoholism is a disease. And it affects family members different than any other disease out there. It's much different than if a person has cancer or heart disease. There's so many different emotions that come into play with close family members. And it's so much so that it affects family members in very adverse ways. And we need to talk about these adverse ways, and we need to explore these different ways that an alcoholic affect their family. There are many codependent behaviors attached with close family members. Things such as enabling the addict, protecting the alcoholic family member by downplaying his or her addiction to others. It's very common for a loved one to lie for the alcoholic as they represent a member of their own family. For like social events. My wife, for example, you could say you're going to a corporate meeting and your wife never shows up. Well, she was sick today. Or even to a family event, a Christmas holiday. Amanda's really sick, or whatever the loved one is. You just make up excuses. Or reality, they could be in the hospital, in the emergency room. They could be getting over, or in the middle of a binge drinking, or they could be having a hangover so bad they're non-functioning. In some cases, you have no idea where your loved one is because they've been gone on a bender for 3 days and nobody knows where they are. Or they could be in jail. And you end up making excuses for these people. It affects the family very, very deeply. It's a very dysfunctional process. It's frustrating. And a lot of what this particular video is for the family members. I want them to understand what they're going through and how to deal with it. That it's not their fault. And when it gets too toxic, you have to get to the point where maybe it's time to break away from that relationship, whatever the relationship is. The second thing is some members may blame themselves or other family members for the addiction of the alcoholic. Statements, such as, it's your fault he or she drinks so much, or you're the cause of the problem. And then there's all this infighting within the family. Like one family member created emotional trauma, which somehow triggered the person who is the alcoholic to become an alcoholic. Well, there may be some, origins in that, but a lot of the infighting is just adds to the dysfunction and the mental instability of the family itself. If there was no alcoholism, there would be no infighting. So alcoholism and whatever the root cause for the origins of that alcoholic to become one is the real issue in the family. Thus, that person is taking the spotlight away from the actual alcoholic by saying you're the problem. So they're not fixating on the real problem, which is the alcoholic. They're talking about other people that may have caused the alcoholic to become an alcoholic. And you have all this dysfunction going on. Feelings of guilt can manifest in parents, definitely, and spouses quite often. Not having an understanding of alcoholism as a disease can further add to the confusion. I want you to understand, a lot of people, and myself included, was I was blissfully unaware of what alcoholism was. I just thought, I had a spouse who drank. Um, Sometimes when I speak at rehab facilities, usually the relationship is a parent with their child, and the parents are full of a lot of guilt. Um, what they don't realize is that they're actually enabling their child by giving them money and a place to stay, and not allowing that child to grow up. Okay? And that's how it affects the family. There's two major relationships: spouses and parents and children. Those are the two major relationships that I tend to talk about. Number three is some family members may become dependent on the actual addiction in their own way. Addicted to caring for the afflicted alcoholic, or constantly worrying about the alcoholic directly, and this directly affects their own life. A family member who spends a large part of their own energy emotionally protecting the alcoholic will soon have a problem of their own. Their identity is as a caregiver, which is really a very deep way of saying you're very codependent on that person. And your life is revolving around the disease of this person, and you're not really exposing the reason why the problem has, why the person is drinking. You're not exposing it. You're just adding to it, and you're not helping. That's, again, part of the dysfunction of alcoholism. Lying for the alcoholic, covering for their lapses in judgment, and the constant worry of their whereabouts. If you have a family member and you're constantly worrying about where they are, what are they doing, are they in trouble, are they in danger, this can wreak havoc emotionally on close loved ones, especially if you have a child and they have a history of, they have a history of getting into trouble with alcoholism. Financial problems, legal problems, physical problems, and emotional problems. Comes to a point, and I talk about this a lot, where you do have to draw a line in the sand and let that person go. You have to let your children go sometimes. You have to let them fail on their own. And they're either going to sink or swim, and you have to cut that cord, as hard as it is. The fourth one, certain family members may need to adopt a dysfunctional role for the alcoholic. For example, a child may have to become their parent's caregiver out of necessity. The child may find themselves in a situation where they have to take care of both themselves and the addicted parent. So there's a role reversal. If you have an older child, maybe 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, on up, this doesn't allow the child to have a normal childhood. It very negatively affects the next generation as they become susceptible to alcoholism and all the other psychological problems that's attached to that, to having to become a parent of an alcoholic. Children may eventually develop feelings of disgust and anger and leave the family unit entirely when they grow up. This happens very often. A lot of times, the child would just move away and never see their parents again, or if they do, it's very limited access. You do have to walk away from caustic relationships, even if those caustic relationships happen to be one or even two of your parents. You have to save yourself sometimes. The last one here is spouses of alcoholics may blame themselves for loved ones' addiction, or they may feel intense resentment and anger towards their alcoholic spouse. Some may enable the addiction and allow for its continuance by providing financial and emotional support. Well, this is codependency 101. Many spouses of alcoholics are codependent on the alcoholic and the emotional roller coaster the addiction creates. The loved one is just believing that someday that person may get better. that they actually might believe the alcoholic's nonsense, that it won't happen again. They'll get better. They'll try harder, which is, anybody in that situation knows how ridiculous all of that is. Dealing with the addiction of a loved one can also become a strange comfort zone over time. If you sit and shit long enough, it's not going to smell anymore. That's the greatest metaphor to being in a family where there's an alcoholic. After a while, it becomes a way of life, and you think that's normal. It's not normal, and you have to recognize it. I plead with people to recognize that living with alcoholism is not a normal behavior, and you don't have to. Okay, I'm giving you the okay to walk away, to save yourself, because you can't always save the alcoholic, and sometimes parting ways may even help that alcoholic in more ways than you can understand. Constantly wishing for the best and being emotionally attached to the upheavals can wreak havoc physically on anyone attached to the addicted. Studies have also shown that violence and spousal abuses are more common when one person in the marriage is an alcoholic. Okay, that means this is pretty much a no-brainer. If the husband is an alcoholic, there's going to be violence. Luckily, different alcoholics have different personalities, and usually the personality comes out with the addiction. In the case of my wife, she was a very nice person. She was never said a mean thing. I was lucky that way. It's probably the reason why we stayed, with my son and I stayed as long. But there's a lot of very mean drunks out there. And that kind of toxicity is something you need to watch out for and move on. Other than that, I just really want to say an alcoholic in the family, the main point of this talk is to understand your role in that alcoholic's life. And if that's the one thing, you have to understand if you're codependent, and to understand, don't get wrapped up into the drama, and you have permission to leave if you need to, whatever the relationship is, and you also have permission to no longer be a codependent or to be an enabler to that person. It's okay. You got my permission from someone who knows. Other than that, again, thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you again. Thanks.